kids as they get older. It's not just telling them what to do, it's teaching them why we do it, and the understanding for it. Because the goal is that our kids will have good mental health because they want to have good mental health, that they will exercise daily because they realize how great that is for the heart, the mind, the body, and the soul, and everything else. But how do you actually just go and do it? I think this in homes should just be like, talking about issues shouldn't be the uncommon. It should just be part of our, I say, rule of life, even though that's often used from a spiritual discipline standpoint. But in my family, like, this is just the norm. Talking about life and tough issues and what's going on with friends and other things is just the norm. So, I mean, the most simplest thing was just do it. What's interesting with, I mean, those of us who work with youth is youth will talk about anything, like talking about mental health, and right now having conversations on racism in this country. Teens love this stuff. This is what the messiness of youth ministry is. It's the parents, I find, often are the ones who, like, we're talking, like, can we say that? Are we allowed to talk about those things? It's sometimes, not often, not always, but it's sometimes the adults who are more struggling with the conversations. But as a parent, even just with a friend, I think you just address it. I mean, in love, with grace, and again, trying to get everyone to understand. Like, I think I said in my talk that we're doing these kind of weekly, and I say family meetings, they're not meetings, they're just check-ins. And in that, we're just like, we love our kids. We're for you. We're not against you. How can we help you? What do you need for school? Like, my kids' lockers are just getting cleaned out this week. My daughter's heading to Western for school next year. There's all these things that got to get done. How can we help you? And in that, we're having conversations. And how are you? Like, how is your mental health? What can we help you with that? What do you need? And then as adults too, if your kids don't talk, there's ways and things like, go for a walk. I know some families who go for a walk every night at 7 o'clock. It's just become their quote unquote rule of life. And I love that. Or if your kids aren't talking, go drive and get takeout McDonald's if you have young kids. And you know what? As you drive to McDonald's, your kids are facing forward and suddenly people start to chat. Like, there's things we can do to start conversation as well. My wife and my son we have an English bulldog. She may burst in. If she does, I'm going to show you my English bulldog, but she's somewhere else right now. But like, they just went for a walk down by the lake, and we live in Ajax, so they went to Whitby, which is just beside us. But think of the rich conversations that happen in the drive in the car, and then walking, and then coming home. Like, those are those things where we might sometimes have to set the stage for good conversations.
So I guess I'm just picturing, as you mentioned there's there's usually a couple of parents. Well, I guess there's three different kinds of parents we, as youth leaders, we tend to deal with, right? Some who are, who have some of that rhythm, and they seem to be able to connect with their kids. You had just mentioned some, who maybe are, who are kind of in that, almost that frozen mode, right? Of what do I do? And so you've given some ideas on how a parent might be able to approach that. How do you then work with a parent who basically says, no, nothing's wrong with my kid. They're in complete denial. They don't want to deal with it for whatever reason. So how do you help navigate that then?
What is hard, and this is a very common question, is how do you help people who don't want help? Right? Like, this is what, from a youth ministry standpoint, from a parenting standpoint, how do you help someone who's not well? Now, if it's crisis, like if someone is their mental health has taken them to suicidal ideation stuff, you're calling 911. Like, we're calling people to come in. And I say that to students often. Like, if one of my friends ever is on the phone with me at night and they're like, I think this is it, I can't handle it, and they're talking that language, I would much rather have a policeman at their door and they get really angry at me. And even if that friendship is the end, I'm okay with that, because what I've heard in my life is these stories that just break my heart, where grade 11 girl says, I'm with my best friend on the phone last night and she's talking like suicide and stuff. And the girl's like, it's no big deal, I'll see you in the morning. And then she does. And the devastation, like, that girl, like, what if I had done something? And so that's the far extreme of that conversation. I think, again, there's ways to open up conversation. So I've been invited into many churches, and they know I did a youth group about 6 months ago. It was a youth group of 20 kids, and parents came out, but the goal was one family. And the youth pastor and I were like, we knew before, the goal was this one family. And it wasn't like I talked to that family all night, but this was a family that wouldn't acknowledge the mental health. And I just made sure there was some connection. And afterward, the kid began sharing and the mom came over, began sharing. And so sometimes it's just, I mean, I have the talk I have a longer version, Hope for the Walking Wounded, on YouTube. And I have many people who just say, hey, I saw this guy in a Zoom call. I heard this talk. What do you think? Like, somehow again, trying to spark conversations. But I also think in families, it's like, I don't know how you help someone who doesn't want help. Uh, I was at actually, I think Matt and I were up at Muskoka Woods for an event once, and someone was talking about the idea of there's only two ways change happens. Actually, it might be Dave Overhaul who said it. I don't know, but it's the idea of like when you give a vision of the future that's just so amazing, or people hit rock bottom. As parents, as youth workers, we're there for either of those. We give this vision like, this is, if your mental health is good, here's how this can affect your faith. Here's how this can, in good ways, and affect your marriages, your relationships, your schooling. But if you hit rock bottom, guess who's here for you, right? We're here to build you back up and to kind of journey with you on that as well. It's a tough question though, because there is no way to just get someone help. Like, it's not as simple as that, but I think there's things to do as a family. Like, you could eat healthy, thinking of the body, mind, and soul analogy. You can eat better as a family. I'm not saying you don't go have a burger. We all do those kinds of things, but you could do, like, we don't do family exercise. Like, I have two teenagers. It's not like we all go for a family walk after dinner each night. When my kids were younger, they did, but we talk, like, in our kind of weekly check-in, like, okay, how are we doing for exercise? And, I don't have a checklist, but it's, just kind of talking. And if my kids are a little, you're a bit emotional but lost. I mean, I have a daughter who's lost her prom and stuff this year, which it's hard. I mean, I have a very expensive dress sitting right across the hall here, which we don't know if it will be used or not. But it's sitting in those conversations and talking about them, and hopefully those conversations keep going. I think part of that too is sitting in, like, if someone even shares, we're not like, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. I think that was George Bernard Shaw, but I say the same right now with conversations on racism, right? Let's listen, and let's keep listening to each other, because we're often, with our kids, we're listening. So if they say they're struggling, we just quickly want to push them towards an answer. And sometimes, like for my daughter's loss with a prom, it's saying, yeah, this is loss. I get it. Right. And sitting in that space for a few minutes. I have I forget the lady on my website, in my parenting section. One of the first things is a lady, it's a long podcast, but quite good, just talking about, it's a broken brain podcast, but she just walks through how to kind of talk in emotion, like be able to sit in that place. That was a long answer with many tangents, but hopefully that kind of went through a bit of that.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind if you kind of delve a little bit more into the idea of sitting in that moment. I mean, I think sometimes, whether it's silence, whether it's that uncomfortableness, we tend to want to avoid. So what are ways that we can do that with either youth around us, or maybe even in terms of our own state of mind?
I remember I attended a church called Sanctus. Some of you might know. It used to be called C4. I'd been away from church for 5 months. This was back 8 years ago, and when I first went to church, one of the days, it was one of these. In the gym we have bouncy castles. It's like this event for kids, and I don't want to talk to anyone. And so I walked into the gym and I found a corner. And I remember my prayer was, God, help no one see me. Like, let me just be invisible. Within minutes, one of my lead pastors walked in, saw me, and made a beeline for me. And I'm like, oh, like, I don't want to. And so, like, I just kind of smiled, and he said nothing. And he slumped kind of down beside me, took a breath, looked around, and just said, yeah, this sucks, doesn't it? And I remember kind of looking over, and I said, yeah, it does. And that's all he said. And we just sat in silence for a few minutes. And it was really moving to me, because most people who came to me, and I say became Job's friends, and that's not a diss on my friends. It's just fix, as opposed to just lamenting and just sitting in the moment. And it's the same with kids, especially with loss and with other things these days, and with each other. It's okay just to be. We like, let's not just flick on Netflix as soon as there's a moment's silence. Let's not just hop on our phones. Make sure that there is time to just listen, to just be. And I think we're losing that. Like solitude and silence is becoming a real lost art for our society. As the moment we're finished, like the moment we're done, out comes a phone. And I mean, on the phone, I have anything in the world. I have thousands of movies and music and podcasts, but in this, we just lose the moment. And it's good to be quiet, and it then teaches our kids it's okay to be quiet. And in that, I think we help deal with some emotions as well.
A few moments ago, you were talking about your daughter who's finishing up high school, going on to Western, which, by the way, Western, that's my alma mater. So go Mustangs, my little plug. And so right now, with a lot of students, grade 12, grade 8, some from their undergrads or beyond, who right now, like you said, they're losing out on, or at least they're missing what is traditionally their rite of passage. And so, how do we as youth leaders help our students, our grads, to navigate through some of that?
What's interesting with some of these questions is that even like there is nothing to process. Like I'll be 49 in a week. I've never dealt with this in my life. None of us on this call. Like, so we're learning, like loss used to be a single small loss. Like I've never had to talk to a grade 12 about what it's like to finish March break and never see your friends in that environment again. Like if you knew that was going to happen, things would have been much different. And so the one thing I think, like, it's almost the same answer as I said before. It's just acknowledging one of the authors that I read. Well, actually, it was the podcast I just mentioned. She just talks about the idea of acknowledging that, yes, this is a huge loss. It must be really sad to be losing your prom. I also just think there's so much loss right now, and then we're heading into the summer. So many kids were working at camps. My son was going to be at a camp all summer. I know Matt, like there's so much camps, but just, I love camp. But there's all this loss with stuff. But let's not, like we have a family vacation booked at the end of August. It's not canceled yet. It probably will be. We're supposed to be driving through California, but we don't know. So I'm trying not to go too far in the future canceling things, because even starting school will be a loss for next year. And we do try to look at the positives. Like I said to my daughter, like she was just saying how it might be, and I don't think there's anything I'm saying that she wouldn't just be fine with me saying, but like she's starting Western next year. And like if you have kids heading to university, who knows, like half her classes are like, half the universities have just cut, like I know Ryerson and McGill and a few others is just all online. Western's one of the numbers that are just doing this hybrid. But it might mean the tutorials are like in person, and like first year psychology and sociology are all online. But she just said it might not be the same, the Frosh Week and the res. And I said, you know what though? Can you just picture being in residence with 200 people your age, all dealing with this the same? Like it's kind of like when you go to camp, there's something special about camp and this contained environment. And university might be that next year for these kids. And so I listen to her, and when there's time, and I think when she can handle a positive, we look towards the good things. And we're very careful too. I will not let in my house any news, anything that talks about life will never be the same. I'll turn off church services. I'll turn off podcasts. We're extrapolating to things we have no idea. We do not know if church will ever be the same. We do not know if life will ever be the same. Like most of us are hoping that, something like we're seeing changes across the country. Like we're, from Ontario, and I don't know if anyone's from Quebec here as well, but like New Brunswick can already be, it's 50 people they're allowed. People went back to school in British Columbia. I have pastors, friends in the US who are beginning to open churches, and there's all kinds of conversation, but I just, let's not add more loss to the loss that hasn't actually happened yet.
No, I like that last statement that you just made. The idea of not adding to the loss that some have already been experiencing. And just as a reminder, everyone else, I know I've been having some great conversation with Brett here, but feel free to jump in if there are things that you'd like to ask as well. I don't want to hog up all the time here. That being said, though, uh, I am wondering, just to kind of shift gears a bit here. Uh, One of the things that you had mentioned in the workshop was there are going to be times when you disagree with people on certain things, and so especially with some of these areas where it is maybe it can be sensitive. How do you deal with someone who let's say just comes straight up to you and says, "Nope, I don't agree with that at all," right? Like how do you approach something like that?
So I always just say this, like I would rather someone have a different opinion than me than have no opinion at all. Like as someone who likes conversation and speaks on, I mean, I speak on everything from pornography, sexuality, media, parenting, like these are big topics. We're not going to agree on everything, but I hope we're still brothers and sisters in Christ if we disagree on something. What concerns me is when people take disagreements and they make these minor issues theologically or theological major issues. Like, I don't know if I said in the talk, but I have 15 emails at home from people who say I'm not a Christian because I sit in a chair when I speak. Like, that's just ludicrous. Like, that's just, you know what I mean? Like, and I will argue those things to death, but because my concern is more the other people who get like hurt by that. And it's the same with other opinions that people have. Like someone once called those of us with anxiety temporary atheists. That's a really hurtful thing. And so people can have another opinion, but it's not okay to that your opinion creates destruction in other people's lives. And mental health is one of those things that I don't like. When I speak on pornography, no one, I mean, I should say no one, very rarely someone comes up and ever says, like, I think pornography is okay. We all know it's wrong. Mental health, sometimes there is this underlying thing that, well, it's, you're really just fine. It's demonic. Like we just have these quick one-offs we say. But when you ask people about the destruction that's happened, a lot of it is church-based, that people, Christians, have said things because many of us haven't stood up and said things when people had said things that were wrong. It's interesting. Everything I just said goes almost along with racism conversations today, right? We'd hear things and we wouldn't step in and say something. I like discourse as well, meaning I love being on a call. I love being on, going to leadership events and stuff where we have differing ideas, because everything I do, I always say I do with open hands, meaning every talk, everything I do, if someone ever comes and says, you're saying that wrong, or this is wrong, or I have a better thought or idea, I'm always open to change because I do not have it all together. I mean, even my views on mental health before, I used to say a lot of things that were just kind of useless, I realized. And going through the journey, knowing what I wish people had said to me gives me a little more insight. And so I hope that there are people who are willing to go, you're right, this is a better way to do things. I put out a video, 10, what would I call it? It's a YouTube video, 10 ways to make your church a safe place for people with mental health. And it's interesting the pushback I got. And I'm like, these are really easy issues. Like one of them was for musical worship leaders to not say everybody rise. And I'm getting pushback. And I say to people, if a third of the people in your audience, like me, if you say to me, let like everyone rise, I cannot worship anymore. My whole goal is just to stand and not pass out because I get dizzy. What about young moms who've been breastfeeding till 3 a.m. and are exhausted? What about someone who's had a hip surgery or something? Like, why make an unnecessary barrier for someone to worship if your job is to help people worship? Just to say, stand if you can, stand or sit or kneel or whatever else. And one of the other ones was putting ropes up. And I just said, like, those of us with mental health like to sit in the back corners, and that's okay. And so when I go to events, I don't want ropes. I want people to sit wherever they want to go in different things. I've completely forgotten what your question was as I head off into different tangents, but I think I answered it in there somewhere.
You've been looking at this journey now of mental health, like you said, for a good number of years now. And even there are some things that you've seen, I think you had commented a moment ago, things that you look back and realize that are different from what you've taught before. What are some, not just some of the major trends that maybe we've seen before, or at least we've taken notice of, but what are some of the more subtle trends that we don't always pick up on that you've noticed over the last few years?
Trends in just in mental health overall.
Yeah.
The one trend I am seeing, which is very encouraging, is that we're willing to speak about it right now. There were many years that mental health was something we just didn't talk about. It was something that those of us like me and others who struggled, you just were quiet about, and you just kind of struggled ongoing. There have been so many changes though, and I think mental health is growing to such a place that if we didn't talk about it, I'd be really worried right now. Like when we look at, like even right now we're seeing with COVID, if you look at like, I'm 40, I'm almost 49. In my life, I've never dealt with real war, real depressions, real things in my life. We were the first generation. My parents were a little bit less. My grandparents dealt with big things. Then you come down to, so like I'm Gen X, you come down to millennials. Each generation has been less resilient, and students today are some of the least resilient we've ever seen. Resiliency, I always think of like you push like a ball in, and resiliency allows it to kind of come back out. The conversations we're having, I think, are helping create better resiliency in kids. We're addressing these issues. Like my favorite thing in the world is getting a chance to speak this on a Sunday morning service for a church. And I, like last year, I did probably every second week, I was at a church speaking on mental health. And so there's great things when you see the church going, we need to help our people connect their faith and their life. Like if our Sunday doesn't connect with our Monday, I'm concerned. Matt and I did the same masters. And in one of my classes, one of my profs once said, the church is answering questions that no one's asking. It was something that, it was one of those things that I've never forgotten. And I always kind of listen when I listen to preachers these days, going like, trying to make sure that we can connect what we're saying. Like if I do a talk on mental health and everyone leaves and goes, but what do I do? I haven't done a good talk on mental health. Like there should be a what now? How do I take it away? How do I connect what I've learned with my faith, my family, and all the other things as well? So I'm seeing good trends in mental health, but I'm also seeing there are churches that are almost doubling down on the answers that have been shown that don't help. They just, like the number of times I still hear from people that I met with my pastor and he said, I just need to read my Bible more and pray more and my mental health will go away. Reading your Bible is great. Praying is great. But like you would never in a million years say that to somebody with cancer or something else. Like that's the foundation which carries us through our journey. But it's not like we serve a God that if we just pray enough, it's like we pull a lever and God then heals us. We're into a weird workspace theology. So I like that we're talking about these things and it's bringing to light some other people who've just kept doing things the way they've always been done. And so I'm encouraged we're talking about it. I'm discouraged still when I hear stories from people that just break my heart of people who are struggling with simple things and their churches are the ones that are hindering them. Like we should be the beacon to push people towards hope, healing, redemption, rescue, use any word you want towards the future. It just makes me sad when, like, how can we be a beacon of hope to the world around us when we're hurting our own people who are in our congregations?
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you firstly for creating a safe space for a bunch of people to have these conversations. It is really meaningful. I actually have two questions, so feel free to answer them in whatever order. You've mentioned a couple of times that this has been sort of a longer journey for you, 8 years dealing with anxiety and that kind of stuff. How can we, as people that work with youth, encourage someone who has gotten a fresh diagnosis? So they've been struggling with stuff, and now they've kind of come to the understanding of like, yeah, I actually do suffer from some sort of mental illness. I'm living with mental illness. What's the encouragement that we can be giving to the youth that we work with?
Well, I think the encouragement is that there is hope. Like thousands and thousands of people that I've seen, I laugh sometimes because I kind of like, I've journeyed with all these people from their infancy of their anxiety disorder to have them actually doing really well and thriving in life. And I say to my wife sometimes, like, when do I get that? Because I would really like that. But my journey, as I say to people, my journey is my journey and your journey is your journey. And uh, I don't know if I shared this on the last call, but like I've been diagnosed with Lyme disease. And so my doctors don't know if Lyme disease is the root issue of everything or not. And so it's one of those, Lyme's another crazy disease in this country, but it's, for me, that diagnosis is really like, I think you said diagnosis. What I love about that word is that we need actual diagnosis. It's not from us as leaders, right? We're not diagnosing, and it's not just from a pastor or someone, right? We need doctors and counselors and people involved. And anxiety is a manageable condition. I like when celebrities talk about, like, we so value celebrity. So I like when I hear basketball players and hockey players, like, who was the guy in Colorado Avalanche who talked about having a panic attack in between periods once? And I'm like, I like that. I like watching Iron Man when he had a panic attack in the middle of one of the movies, because it normalizes a bit of it. And even for me, I don't mind sharing those things that have happened to me about almost passing out and crying in my car, because it connects. I've just learned when people share those things with me, I'm like, oh, I'm not, I'm normal. It's okay to go through those things, and I can kind of get beyond them. So I think it's the idea of hope, that there is hope. Like, anxiety is not this, like, many of us have it and we learn how to manage it. And so there's a bit of tinkering, figuring out what to do, that when we get stressed, we begin to feel like, many of us have, we know there's certain feelings, we feel tingly, whatever it might be. We know then how to bring ourselves down from that. So it's a process, but just getting a diagnosis to me is actually a good thing. But a diagnosis is not a label, right? We have to make sure, like, I'm not, I always say, like, I hope someone doesn't come on a call like this and say, oh, it's the anxiety guy. Like, I might not feel like I'm more than that some days, but I know I'm much more than that. Hopefully that answers your first question.
Yeah, it did. That was great. I love the idea that a diagnosis is not a label. That's really liberating. It's an awesome idea. My second question relates to how you were talking about generations becoming less and less resilient. How do we foster resilience with the youth that we're working with? How do we create that sense of resilience, that empowerment to be resilient with the kids that we're working with?
I believe the number one thing that has created unresilient kids is overparenting. Overparenting is destroying us as a culture. So, like, the most basic idea of overparenting is when we do too much, kids do too little. When we overfunction, they underfunction. And so I have a talk called Parenting Navigating Everything. And so I'm looking at the foundations. We talked about needing that relationship with our kids. We talked about parenting styles, discipline, communication, how to spend time with your kids. But those are the conversations. If you don't learn that your kids need to learn how to write an essay on their own, here's how to do it, and they can overcome it. If kids can't overcome things, they then they flat, like, especially when kids go to university and college. This is the big one I hear from a lot of people. There was a lady walked up after one of my talks, and she said, because I was talking about overfunctioning and underfunctioning, she said, Brett, we actually made a chorus for first year, mostly men. And I said, like, oh, what do you do? And she said, well, we got to tell them to shower. And I laughed, and she said, I'm not kidding. She said, they've been overparented. Mom especially has told them, like, it's got to shower, it's Tuesday night. Or learning how to, like, suddenly mom or dad aren't saying, is your homework done? I have an 18-year-old. I haven't asked my daughter, is your homework done, a single time in probably 2 years, because this is where we need to go back as youth workers and work with children's ministry as well in this continuum of parenting kids right. Can you picture, as youth workers, if kids came to us well-adjusted, physically, emotionally, and spiritually strong? Can you picture our youth groups and what we might be able to do, as opposed to often this brokenness that we get and we have to kind of repair and band-aid? It was Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, who once said the idea of like I'd rather build strong children than repair broken men. Like, I love that idea of working with younger people and kind of coming forward. But Overparenting to me is how we teach kids. Like what we've done is, who's the quote? Julie Lythcott-Hames. She wrote a great, she did a TED talk. She says, we've stopped preparing our kids for life and we've begun protecting them from life. And it is what I see today. Just like my daughter had to like apply for Western. And so we let her apply for Western. And we've let her choose universities. We actually did spreadsheets. Here's how much it is to go away. Here's how much it is to stay at home. But like kind of mid-grade 11, we as families start putting, like as our family began putting, not weight, I always say in my other talk, kind of putting weight of personal moral responsibility. But that even for us began in grade 4. In grade 4, my wife and I, we heard, you probably all remember Tony Campolo. Tony said 20 years ago that in grade 4, what he did was so if your kid says, can I buy a song? We don't say, well, let me research it for you. I did for my younger kids, but in grade 4, we flipped it around and said, well, here's a computer. Here's, how to type in the name of the band, how to type in the song, and then they make a decision or not. But we're teaching kids how to discern. Because the problem is that if our kids haven't learned how to discern, if our kids haven't learned how to talk to strangers, how to go on a go train, how to deal with boys and pornography and girls, and all these things, they head off to university or college and they're flattened by things. I was at a school, I won't say the school, I was at a Christian school to speak many years ago in June. And they said, let's do a fun talk. And so they said, let's do the sex talk to end off the year. And I'm like, weird, you're calling it the fun talk, but I'll take it. And so I got to the school and there's this flurry of activity in the office. And I said to the guy, what's happening? And he said, oh, some idiot's here to talk to our kids about sex. And I was going to say to him that I'm the idiot. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. And I said, what is this guy going to say? And he went on this tirade of everything this idiot was going to say. And I finally said, listen, I got to be honest, I'm the idiot. He did not make the connection. So that sounded really weird. But I said, everything you're saying is not true. And I said, I'm assuming you have a really sheltered grade 9 kid. And he goes, no, I have a grade 12. And I said, I looked at my watch, it's the middle of June, school is finished in a week. And I said, where's your kid going to school next year? And it was a school away from home. And I said, what's going to happen in 8.5 weeks when at Frosh Week, a young woman throws herself sexually at your son and his face just drained from blood and he still pulled his kid out and left. And I'm like, we're really setting a kid up for destruction in this way. And so over-parenting and not speaking about things, it was Tim Elmore, who I hope you should follow. He's a really great blogger and author, but he talks about it's the job of every kid to tear down our fences as parents and to then build their own fences. And that was one of those things that really changed. I want my daughter and my son to love Jesus because they love Jesus, not because I love Jesus. I want my kids to get good night's sleeps because they know it's important to get good night's sleeps. And now sleeps for teens is actually 2 a.m. till noon hour. And I have no problem with that. Melatonin works different for the teenage brain. It's why we've talked about having high school start at 10 a.m. for years, but we don't. I want my kids to exercise because they realize how good it is. And when they're emotionally struggling and they go for a walk and they come back and say, something's different, this is where we teach resiliency. Now, you can begin resiliency now, doing things now that will help you maybe later in the summer or in the spring and stuff, right? We can build that body, mind, and soul, spiritual disciplines for our faith and counseling and stuff. But you have to begin those things now and get resiliency later. It's like exercise, right? You don't start working out now if you want to do something in the summer. Summer's already here. You're doing something now kind of for another season. I was going to say, I put the YouTube link in the comments, which is just the YouTube video of the 10 ways to make your church a safe place. In thebrettallman.com, if you just click on blog, you will find the mental health section there as well. And I mean, there's lots of other ones, great books, great websites. And I actually am posting tomorrow. I'm actually thinking of putting up a tab just on racism, just taking some of the best materials I'm seeing from people and putting it all in one place. But my friend Chris Chase and his friends are doing a thing called the House of Common, which is really good. It's 11 Black guys talking about race, and it's funny and it's open and it's rich. And so tomorrow I'm posting one of theirs, but you can find that If you just Google the House of Common, no, but you'll probably get the House of Commons. You have to actually find the YouTube channel, but it's quite good.
That's very helpful. Thank you. One of the comments that you made earlier was sometimes the church is answering questions that we're not asked or people aren't asking. So I'm wondering, in this area of mental health, what are the questions that we're not actually asking right now?
Well, it's not even that we're not asking, it's that we're not even. I was at a church 9 months ago, and they look at the year and they divide up the sermons. And so you can, I mean, I'm not going to debate expository preaching versus like topical teaching. Like, I'm topical and I walk through what the scriptures say on things. Other people, like you take a Mark Clark in BC, I mean, he's a master at this. He can do years on Matthew, but in it address singleness and sexuality and pornography and like just you name it, all these things. But this one church just kind of said, we do mental health once a year. And this church actually brought me in to speak on pornography on a Sunday morning, which is very unorthodox. But the pastor said to his church, we're leaving our ongoing sermon series for 1 week. And they actually had talked to the whole church. So children's ministry through junior high, senior high, young adult, small groups, every age and stage dealt with sexuality that day. Like, I was so impressed. Like, talk about a church where it's not the uncommon, but the common to talk about tough topics. And even in the tough topics, having differing ideas and thoughts is good, right? That's how we, like, iron sharpens iron, but it takes iron and iron to sharpen iron, right? It means having well thought out, like, it's going to mean searching scripture and Google and books and thoughts to create, right, our ideologies and things. But the more we do that, the more we can actually talk about these things. Mental health, I think what we often do is we don't listen. Like, what most people answer with mental health is we give an answer of what someone we know did to get help. And so if your best friend went to a sleep clinic and he has bad sleep apnea and is on a CPAP machine, you say, oh, anxiety, you should get a CPAP machine, which is irrelevant unless you have sleep apnea. Or someone will say to me, well, you should go on meds. And well, maybe. I mean, I actually think no one should go on meds. If I could help you, and if counselors and other people could help you to never go on meds, we choose no meds. But if you need meds, meds might be okay. Like, it's this nuanced conversation that we need to have, but addressing it and then looking at walking towards hope and healing, not just kind of saying, well, here's what we need to do. Because the answers aren't just everyone should do this or just do that, because we don't know. And so it's giving people freedom in this journey to also do what they do. And I love hearing the stories of people who take body, mind, and soul, and it's a little different for them. Like, even how we express our faith. There's a great book by Gary Thomas called Spiritual Pathways. Anyone ever read that? Like, it's just the idea that some of us, like, each of us are different. Like, is the term a naturalist? It sounds like a nudist. If I'm saying that the wrong way, just cut that off later. But it means that I experience God in nature. And so I live on, like, I can probably golf 2 golf balls and I'm on Lake Ontario. There's something about seeing water and walking in a forest, and many people are like that. There's something about nature that I feel close to God. And so it's learning your spiritual pathways, but giving people freedom in those pathways to find, because each of us are a little bit different. So mental health is just one of those things I think we need to talk about and then give people freedom to journey it, even though their journey might look different than ours.
I had a youth recently tell me that they didn't want to bring their problems to me because they didn't want to be a burden. How do we remind our youth that the reason why we're with them is because we want to be with them and we want them to bring their problems to us without constantly saying it over and over?
I just think we say that over and over. Like, it's no different than me telling my kids they need to put the dishes in the dishwasher. They're teenagers and their minds are scattered often, but they don't want to burden us. And so we as youth workers, paid or volunteer, as parent, like, especially, like, forget parents in this, but youth workers, paid or volunteer, you're literally, you're giving your lives to help them do life. And so It's creating the safe spaces and letting them know what burdens are and are not. And I also just say to students sometimes, I'll let you know if you are a burden. Like if you email me 500 times the next month, might not be something that I can do, but I'm like literally, I want to help you journey through life, and I want to do that. I say to my kids always, I'm for you, I'm not against you. I think too often it's just like parents and kids, and it's like, no, we're a family. And I think as churches, we're a community. Like we, as a youth group, we are a youth group. We're here to help you do life, and we want to help you do life. And so I think it's one of those things you just have to say a bunch. Many students, they won't care about that, right? Some though, they think they're being a burden, which adds another. And if you look back at their history and how they were parented and things, you often can find the root issues of why they were saying those things. But it's not an easy answer, but I just think tell them over and over and over again. We love you. We're here for you. Here's how we journey with you.
As we're getting close to the end of our hour here, one more that I'm going to throw at you, Brett, is this. One of the things that you had mentioned in your talk was this idea that you know, as you were journeying through the last few years, there was a different wholeness. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering about is, as you know, depending on how things unfold with COVID, depending on how things develop over the next few weeks, few months, you know, in some ways, I wonder if, in a sense, a lot of us are going to have a different wholeness. So how do we prepare for something like that then?
I think that, I mean, the mental health wholeness is a conversation on me having an acceptance of where I am, meaning and I'm not speaking this over myself, I'm just saying, I don't think I'm ever going to get better. I've been unwell for 8 years, but even though I accept where I'm at, I'm also still working with a functional medicine team of people and also Lyme doctors and all these things to help me kind of journey through this. If we're looking at coming out of COVID, I just think we need to do everything in our power to make sure that we're doing. I've been reading I'm doing a new course for men, looking at being better fathers, husbands, and all these other things. And everything I'm reading the last few months is about habits. The little habits that you do that over time make good things. It's the same book I showed you guys in the other talk, right? Little things you do every day. Friedrich Nietzsche said the idea of, for anything great to happen, there needs to be a long obedience in the same direction. And so I think it's just, if we're looking at coming out of COVID better, we need to make sure exercise, community, and community is actually one that's even changed in the last 11 days since I've been with you guys. Like my wife and I last night went over to a friend's, 2 nights ago, to a friend's house, and just one couple and our couple, and we were 6 feet apart on a deck, and we chatted for 3 hours, and it was really moving. Like I got even teary. Like we haven't done that in 3 months. And so I'm seeing people do things. Like I know Trinity Bellwoods Park in Toronto was a zoo, but then they put these circles in and people are all in the circles. Like it's great seeing kind of like coming out of a cocoon. People are doing things. I'm seeing kids. So as long as we're seeing people, we're doing things, we're eating as good as we can, we're staying grounded in scripture and faith and friends. Like I think we're setting ourselves up for good things. My concern is the people who are still not leaving their homes, parents who are telling their kids they're not even allowed to see their friends. In my neighborhood, just before I came on the call, I looked out and there was a couple walking. There was a couple. So there's 2 men behind and 2 women in front, one on the sidewalk and one on the road. Have you seen that kind of awkward walk because it's 6 feet apart? And I love it. I love people looking at what we're allowed to do and making a way. And so I just think we keep pushing forward into this. And I think especially students, we're so much more resilient than we think we are. If you think back a week and a half ago, before all the George Floyd things happened, and we thought we couldn't handle anymore. And suddenly the world's changed. And I think today I read there's an asteroid about to hit the earth. Might be something I'm not going to follow, but the truth is, I think we're much more resilient, and especially students are much more resilient than we think. So just keep doing those good things, and I think that new wholeness will kind of come from that.
Yeah, Fred, I'd love a chance just as following from this. I know you're going to be having a resource coming out in due time that I think is important. That's for youth workers, parents. It's going to be quite substantial. I know I got an advanced copy of, and I know that I didn't follow through on writing an endorsement for it, but yet I fully endorse it. I just didn't get that over Christmas to get that all done for you. But this would be like, I'd love to kind of have you a chance just to kind of share a little bit what that resource is. It's just another next step for those that are on this call, those that would watch this recording, of how critical this is. I think what you're going to be sharing out ties in much larger, the resourcing around with parents and navigating everything, and all this on that you've compiled together. This is going to be, I believe, a very critical resource and very, very helpful. And I'd love for you just to give a little snapshot of it, like just kind of tease it out so that when it's out and available, that we can really jump on that within our community here.
Sure. So I created a talk called Parenting Navigating Everything, which was this foundations of parenting. So I actually, when I first created this talk, it was 1,250 slides in a keynote presentation, realizing that's not humanly possible. And then I realized I'd written the outline of a book. But what I did is I have 7 chapters of parenting, and I was actually looking at the anxiety and phobia workbooks. This was the other book I showed you. But at the bottom of it, there's all of these things. I don't know if it's backwards for you or not, but like this says like relaxation, exercise, coping with panic. And I think it was my wife who said, well, you have all that. Like that's your talks. And it was one of those moments that I realized that I do have that, like mental health, sexuality, pornography, dating. And I realized that the goal is to give parents one resource, because I am overwhelmed by the amount of resources out there. And so I'm lucky and fortunate in my job in that I can read 100 parenting books over a year and glean down the best ones and put the best content into a conversation. So the book has been 3 years in the making. It is currently 241,000 words. It is just gone back to my editor is a company called Word Alive. They're in Winnipeg. It's just gone back to them for the final everything. So I'm waiting for that this week, and it goes to print. And so we're hoping early July, but it is a handbook for parents. And so the first 7 chapters are looking at parenting, right? But whether it's teens and young kids, how do we create like resilience is some of it, progression of parenting, all of these things. And then every other chapter, like mental health is the largest chapter by far, but it's written in 2 ways. It's written for you as a parent, but it's also written if you just want to let your kid read it, you could. So it was an awkward thing to write because I wanted to make sure that I don't have to have another book for kids, but mental health is one you could give to your kids. There's a few other chapters, dating a few others, but there's also these parenting tips throughout it as well. But I'm hoping that it's just like, I know this is incredible high expectation, but when you have a baby, most people are given a book called What to Expect When You're Expecting. It's just kind of like the book, but there was nothing after that. And especially in our Christian world, I'm hoping that this is something that gives people a starting base to kind of go begin kind of conversations on that. So if you follow me on any of my social media or anything else, you'll see this the moment we're allowed to have it out.
Well, Brett, thank you so much for making this time. For those of us that are on this call, those that will be watching the recorded version of this, this is something that's so important. Very live conversation, both very practical to what is happening in the conversation we are seeing right now evolve within our students and conversations they're having. Also very tangible for how we continue to walk with students. And I like what you shared beginning. This is a season we're in right now to listen and to learn. And that is very prevalent to our very moments right now, but going forward as we walk with students and the challenges and the ups and downs, their lives and their journey. And so just thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your vulnerability that you have shared over many years. And from CBOQ and myself personally, as well as Alvin, thank you for the friendship that you share, that we've had these times together, and the continual ways that our ministries continue to cross paths. I'd like to just close in a word of prayer for you, Brett, and then bless all of you that are on this call. Thank you for everyone that's joined with us. We pray that's been a blessing for you as well, and that you will have a great evening. Lord Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for Brett, for his family, his kids. We just pray a blessing over all of them, as Brett is so faithfully and graciously giving of himself and of his time to do many teachings and Zoom calls and Facebook Lives and everything across our country right now. Lord, we just bless these walks that he has with his wife. We just thank you for those moments as as his daughter prepares for Western and that move there. And we just think of his kids, his life that he balances in there for his health and well-being, his love for you and his relationship with you. Lord, we thank you for the ministry that you have given to him and the blessing that has been to thousands upon thousands of young people, of parents, of youth workers, of church leaders. Lord, we thank you for Brett and bless him in your name. Amen. Friends, thanks so much for tonight. Alvin, thank you for your hosting and your leading through this and facilitating of this. And on behalf of CBOQ, continue to thank you as youth workers and parents as you invest into the lives of your kids, of your youth, the difference you make and the impact that you know and you don't even know, the ripple effect that you have that we may not see or ever hear about until eternity. But thank you for the work you do, loving and caring and listening to our students. Bless you guys. Have a wonderful night.
Everybody.